Hi gang, a full-on podcast today. We're talking VAR, of course. Martin's been to the Football Writers Footballer of the Year dinner. I went to the Academy Under-18s final. Martin's letter from the Gantry is about Aston Villa. My voice of passion is about sports scientists. And we finish up with stoppage time, looking at one or two other issues. And of course, you can't miss out three of the best, and Martin makes them pay. You also can't miss out looking at the Patreon for all the latest offers. And if you want to follow us on social media, X, Instagram, TikTok, you know how to find it. Maybe one day you can tell me. The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks like Xavi! Ready! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello, the Joy of Football podcast with the voice of the Premier League and so much more beyond. Martin Tyler and me, Neil Barnett. Today we are looking at the vital question of, Christ, what's going on? Oh no, it's gone to VAR. Oh, hang on, stay there. We should be finished in about 3 minutes. It might be 5. Martin Tyler, would you vote for VAR or against VAR when the Premier League votes?
Well, it doesn't really matter what I think. The Premier League are going to vote to keep it. And Wolves are perhaps just rattling a few cages, really, trying to make people think about it. If you go around, a lot's been made of Sweden not doing it, but all the other major football countries are doing it and living with it and probably doing it a bit better. And that's where I would speak up in defence of VAR. It's not the process, it's kit, really. I mean, there's cameras like the ones pointing at us and the microphones like us, but it's how you use it that matters.
Referees.
I know, but I feel that what it has done is taken away a bit of the authority of the referee. I'm not saying they're hiding behind VAR, but I do think...
No, they're making the game about themselves.
Well, we can't manage without them, Neil.
I know, but they're making the game about themselves. The Champions League semi-final between Real Madrid and Bayern Munich was VAR at its best, and then an idiotic linesman mucking up. Even if it was offside, it should have gone to VAR.
We're always going to get human error
on that occasion.
Like Darren England, who was in VAR when the Spurs goal, the Liverpool goal that Spurs should have stood. So it's a mistake. We all make mistakes, and I think of all the things that have gone wrong, people highlight that, but I think that's perhaps the most understandable thing. It was a genuine mistake. He thought the referee had given the goal, and he hadn't, and so wrongly it was disallowed. I think at the moment the game is probably a bit worse off for VAR, so to agree with you to some extent, but I think it has the power to get it right, to get it better. And anybody thought that VAR would be built in a day was wrong. There's so much to learn about it. There are still things that I don't like about it, which are this constant looking at slow motion replays for judgment calls. For factual calls, yeah, there've been one or two great calls recently, and I know it's a bit of a bugbear for you, but was it in the penalty area, was it out the penalty area? Mats Hummels in the Dortmund semi-final thought he'd given away a penalty, I think, by his expression, but it was proved to be outside the penalty area by very good VARing, and then of course that was in a European context, but I think that's happened in the Premier League as well. I think there is a lot on Howard Webb's shoulders to get it right, but he's tied also by IFAB. The laws of the game make it more complicated to referee. And that is, listen, we've done, this is our 8th podcast. I've asked for David Ellery to come on 3 or 4 occasions previously.
Who is, of course, the ex-referee who's big on IFAB.
Yes, and just to explain the link and the thought, I think it's the thought process as to how, and we had a private conversation before we went on the podcast here about Roberto Rossetti, who is a very impressive man, a former referee, Italian, who has a big say in the way that UEFA and Italian football, they work the VAR. It is working in other countries, so it can work in the Premier League.
He's a brilliant passionate football man.
Yeah, he loves the game as much as any of us. And we know you're not watching or listening to this if you're not passionate about football. And so he's one of the good guys, you know. And he's trying to make VAR work. And I went to a briefing a couple of years ago from UEFA, which he held in London. And it was stimulating and really made you, and that's why I'm trying to stick up for it now.
Well,
it can be done better. And also, sorry, Neil, you'll have the last word on this, but this in the stadium experience has to be improved, because I was at a wonderful game, which we're going to come on to later, between Aston Villa and Liverpool recently, and a number of the goals were VAR checked, as they all are, but this was obviously contentious. Was it, should it or should not be a goal? And then there were 3 goals disallowed, I think, all on VAR calls. So yeah, and we got 10 minutes at the end of the game to sort of compensate for it, in which time actually Villa put the game to good use. But it was intrusive. I'm hearing what was happening at Stockley Park as a commentator. I'm not hearing the referee. We've made this point on the podcast before. But I'm getting something that the fans aren't getting, and the fans should get it and more. But I've been trying to think, are the referees frightened of, are we asking too much of referees to be good communicators as well as good referees? The cricket umpires seem to be, they've grown up with their rugby, yeah, but there's a limit to things that they have to look at. Was it, it's a process in cricket, ball tracking, snicko or whatever they call it these days, and they know, we all know what's coming. But in football analysis on judgment calls, the simple answer is to say, let VAR do the facts and let's worry about the rest. But I don't know. It's not going to change. Whatever we think,
no, I don't think
it's not going to change.
I hate VAR, but I hate it because of the way it's run. I think it's brilliant and should be run correctly. And I go back, it's interesting that we brought up, both of us, to each other, Rossetti. The 2018 World Cup, Italy weren't in it. And Serie A already had VAR, which I think the Premier League hadn't at that point.
No, they hadn't, no.
And the Italians ran VAR at the Russia World Cup because they weren't in the World Cup. And they made a wonderful job of it in a way that us English have completely cocked it up. And one of the things that happened in that World Cup was all the pulling and shoving and fouling at set plays was called. And that's why England got to the semi-finals. We got so many penalties. That's why Harry Kane won the Golden Boot. We got so many penalties. And I'll tell you what, they were all penalties. It was actually VAR working. And they did it in a way that was pro-football. Now it's done in a way that is, let's make it all about referees. And it just drives me up the wall. And yeah. So VAR must be here to stay, but I go back to what I've said from the beginning. You need 3 people in the VAR office. One is someone with refereeing qualifications to talk the rules of the game. One is someone who's played football to actually bring some football intelligence to the game. And then you need someone with an IQ of at least 12.5 in order to compensate for the other 2. Because quite frankly, it is just driving me.
Even if Howard Webb agreed with you, they can't do it because the protocol says you have to be a referee, I think, currently or maybe 3 years after you retire to be in there. So and that's everybody. It's no good having one of your 3 like that. Everybody has to be that. So that's the way it is, unless they can change the protocol. And these things are being worked on. I mean, the PJMOL are obviously not happy that a club like Wolves are saying, come on, we want this gone. I mean, it's putting them on their mettle. They want it to get better. They're not relishing, despite the fact you think it's just all about referees. They want the game not to have bad content, not to mistakes that we could all talk about that have lived with the game. Maradona's hand of God, Frank Lampard's goal in Bloemfontein, all the things that VAR would have been able to put a stop to. They want those things ruled out, and VAR can do that. Don't be so forensic is my tip to it, and do the best to think of the game as well as the, if you like, the protection of the decision makers, really.
PGMOL is professional game match officials. What's the L?
What the hell is it?
Hey, I don't know. But can I just say, any organisation that calls itself PGMOL, I mean, get an acronym that we can all say, please. That just sums you up. It's just stupid. Right, we're going to move on. But basically, VAR has to stay and be improved, not be dropped.
Whatever any fan or any broadcaster or any reporter thinks, it will stay. And it's a bit of sabre rattling from some of the clubs just to make them think a bit more about it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And the Premier League have been robust in their response, which makes us absolutely clear that it is going to stay. But we talked about refereeing decisions a lot before VAR, and we've forgotten all that. But it was nothing. The thing you always said as a commentator, well, the ref only had one look at it. As a broadcaster, you had 3 or 4 looks at it, but the ref didn't have that privilege. Now he does, and it should improve. I think it will improve, and in the end, perhaps when they write the history books, long after Neil and I have stopped looking at cameras and talking to microphones, maybe it will be regarded actually as very much the right thing to do. You went to the Football Writers' dinner for the Footballer of the Year recently. What's your takeaways on that? Well, it was the Footballer of the Year and the Women's Footballer of the Year as well. And because of the situation the Manchester City men found themselves in, Phil had to do his acceptance speech on video and was recorded the day before the dinner. And of course he spoke up very well, and everybody in the room recognised his talents. But Bunny Shaw, the Women's Footballer of the Year, was in the room, although she was in a medical boot because she's got a broken foot, and she couldn't get from her table up to the presentation area, so they interviewed her at her table, and she was charming, spoke wonderfully well about the women's game, about her teams in Manchester City as well. It was a Manchester City night, and they showed, and my former colleagues at Sky do wonderful packages at these events of the highlights of the players' season, and it was take your breath away stuff with the goals that she scored more than an average of more than a goal a game. So I think she stole the show in the room. But obviously Phil Foden had the Footballer of the Year. Going back really to the early post-war years, it's been a very prestigious award. Other Player of the Season awards, clubs do their own, obviously, Player of the Season, but there are other national awards as well. But Footballer of the Year is actually an expression that the Football Writers, I'm sure they haven't copyrighted it, but that's what it means really. And what I liked about Phil Foden's speech, though it was on video, not in the room, was that he recognised the extent of the honour. And Football Writers, we've both dabbled in it in our careers, but it's a very, very difficult skill. And there was an award which was a European award, writing about European football, by one of the sponsors of the Football Writers, FedEx, and that was given to Adam Leventhal, a colleague of mine at Sky, for extraordinary reporting. This is writing, remember, extraordinary reporting of the earthquake in Turkey, which took many lives, including somebody we both knew, Christian Atsu, and that was sort of, if you like, that was the line that really sold it as a story. It should have been a news story, really, but it was a football.
Christian Atsu, of course, played for Newcastle for quite a long time, and belonged to Chelsea. Never played for Chelsea.
But that was a very moving part of the dinner, and seeing some old friends. And there are still a few people around our age. I saw Tony Stenson, who used to cover Wimbledon. He was Stengun the Stenson was his byline. Patrick Collins, a very erudite writer from a writing family, and I sat next to Bob Harris, who wrote lots of books about Bobby Robson, and told me he's still writing books, and not all of them about football now. And I was a guest of a guy, Graham Nicholas, who's still working. He's 50 years in the business, like you and me, really. And
every Bournemouth home game, I see.
Yes, he lives down that way, and he's got a book out. So when it actually comes out, I'll give him a bit of publicity if we're still going on this.
Right. Well, my little outing recently was to the final of the Academy League the under-18s league, and the way it's run, which is very sensible for once, is that it's broken down geographically. So there's an Academy South and Academy North, and the two champions play each other in a one-off game for the national title. And it was Chelsea versus Manchester United at Stamford Bridge. Manchester United won by 2-1. And you were talking recently about getting to grips with players that you're about to see in the first team, and saying that Manchester United have been not fielding, but on the substitutes bench, having so many substitutes who hadn't played and were under 18s players. Well, they played in this game, and the first goal was scored by Ethan Wheatley.
Yeah, who came on at Crystal Palace when I was commentating recently in the game. When the game was done and dusted from the Palace were winning comfortably, but he showed that he made good runs, got on the ball, and he's, I think, an out-and-out goal scorer.
Yeah, well, he was strong and impressive for half an hour. He got the opening goal, and then he wasn't very good after that, and missed 2 one-on-ones. So interesting to see how he develops.
Yeah, but in the dressing room he said, "I've done my job, I've scored."
Yeah.
That's the strikers. I'm speaking up for Ethan here.
Well, the Chelsea equalised early in the second half with a goal from the right back, who has played 5 minutes in the first team against at the end of the 2-0 win against Tottenham, Josh Achampong, who from open play as well, he got forward and headed in across. And then the winner was scored by another Ethan for Manchester United, Ethan Williams. But the guy that most people kind of came away talking about, I think, well, there were two. Well, one for Chelsea was Tariq George, who's a number 10, and is look, there's so many number 10s now, but his passing range was just had to be seen to be believed. And for Manchester United, it was the left back Harry Amas,
Amas, I think,
who's another one who's been on the bench.
And they signed him, I believe, from Watford. And this is what actually takes you by surprise. And you know a couple of the Chelsea lads who've been signed from Everton and from Newcastle. Yeah. That these transfers happen at a certain age where the legalisation of football moves is permitted. And it's odd to think of them. I think the lad from Newcastle was on the bench when they played Newcastle and nearly got on, or maybe it was the Everton one when they played Everton recently. But played
it was Isaiah Samuel Smith against Everton.
Yeah, so
Ollie Harrison maybe against Newcastle.
And you know, we talk about former clubs and everything, but sometimes you have to delve a bit deeper to find that they were at different clubs. And then you've got someone like Madueke, who was at Crystal Palace at 14, at Spurs at 16, and has got a real track record. I remember Rio Ferdinand telling me the number of clubs that he'd been at before he finally settled at West Ham. They'd just go around trialling. And there's a story about Raheem Sterling, isn't there? He was 15 playing for Brent Schools, I think, in a game at the Chelsea training ground, which would then have been the old training ground, I guess. But maybe Cobham, it's been there a while. And that Chelsea had a chance and then had to pay all these millions for him at a much later stage in his career. So it's the luck of the draw, and those who have to be accountable for talent spotting and recruiting, that is a tough job. And I know that it's often the sporting directors who do that, and they're very concerned that their player that they've signed does well in the first team, gets the maximum opportunity, because obviously they're not picking the teams, or in theory they're not picking the teams. So, and I admire these youngsters who give it a go at different clubs. If you get rejected at such a young age by one club, you have to be pretty tough. You have to have a lot of self-belief to go again. And I hope these lads make it.
You've just reminded me of a game I went to see in the early 1990s, before the academies were created, and there was a competition called the South East Counties League, and there was a League Cup, a South East Counties League Cup, which was an alternative to the FA Youth Cup.
Saturday mornings, wasn't it?
And the final was over 2 legs, and it was Chelsea versus West Ham. And I don't think Chelsea won any at youth level for a while. And I went to Upton Park and Chelsea won 4-1. It wasn't away goals counting double. And we came back to Stamford Bridge a week later and Chelsea went a goal up, and then West Ham won 5-2 and it went to penalties. And years later, I discovered from a gleefully sarcastic Frank Lampard that he scored the winning penalty. But he told me that the number 10 for West Ham, and they were playing as West Ham
Frank
often
was
did
playing
in
for
those
West Ham.
days. Yeah.
Yeah.
The number 10 for West Ham was a schoolboy, 3-4-1-2. That was the shape. And the number 10 schoolboy who basically changed the game was Rio Ferdinand.
Wow, yeah. They got
playing number 10.
They got to the Youth Cup final together, and I'm going to refer to the Youth Cup final in my letter from the Gantry.
Well, that is coming up next. So let's go to Letter from the Gantry by Martin Tyler.
Thank you, Neil. That's the best intro I've ever had. Congratulations, Aston Villa, who have a first Champions League season to look forward to, evoking memories of winning its predecessor, the European Cup, back in 1982. Congratulations also to Unai Emery, who will now take a 6-different team into Europe's elite competition. It wasn't quite sealed against Liverpool in the final Villa Park game of the season, where I was commentating, but a compelling recovery to take a point from 3-1 down gave their only rivals, Spurs, no room for error. And a goal double from a substitute gave all we commentators a moment we've been waiting for since this young Colombian forward had arrived from Chicago Fire. Duran, a Birmingham band, believe it or not. Confirmation of 4th place and the reward which comes with it arrived with the final whistle at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium 24 hours later. Aston Villa were on the town, in the city, having their end-of-season awards night, so they were all together, very appropriate, as they have been so together on the pitch all season. It reminded me of my very first visit to Villa Park 52 years earlier. Then it was also the last home game, in fact the final match of the 1971-72 season for Villa. It was also the club's last fixture, to this point, in the 3rd tier of English football. I'm sure they won't be down there again. League One, it would be now simply the 3rd division back then. The opposition? Well, for Liverpool in 2024, read Chesterfield in 1972. Villa had already earned promotion as champions, and on the night they won 1-0 with a goal from Ian Ross, incidentally a former Liverpool player. By today's criteria, they would have finished with 102 points. I was a guest of the Villa goalkeeper that night, Jim Coombs, but the connection was actually cricket, not football. My South London flatmate, and by then England Test fast bowler, Bob Willis, was in the process of transferring from Surrey to Warwickshire. Jim was a fine dual sportsman who played first-class cricket for 4 counties and then became an outstanding chief executive at Lancashire. He and Bob had been real mates as well as teammates during Jim's spell at the Oval. He also played, Jim Coombs, 376 matches in the Football League as a goalkeeper. The crowd was around 45,000, only some 5,000 less than for the recent Liverpool visit all those years later. And the club function was not 24 hours later, but straight after the game. The match had kicked off at 7:30, so it was a late night for all concerned. Bob and I celebrated with Coombsy into the small hours, and I'm sure the class of 2024 had the party of all parties on hearing that 4th place had been confirmed. This is Villa's first 4th place visit since 1996, when their manager was Brian Little. Back in 1972, Brian was only 18, but was already making his name in Villa Claret and Blue. They won the prestigious FA Youth Cup that year, as a 3rd division club, remember, against Liverpool by coincidence, 1-0 at home with a penalty from John Gidman, who, like Little, would go on to play for England, and 4-2 at Anfield, where Brian scored twice. Now, Aston Villa were one of the 12 founding members of the Football League. They did the acclaimed League and FA Cup double at the back end of the 19th century, a feat completed just a few days before they actually moved into Villa Park. Visit the stadium and you can almost reach out and touch the history. And there's plenty of playing history on view these days too. European Cup winner Gary Shaw, the only Birmingham-born player in that side, was on media duty as usual at the Liverpool game. I was commentating with Andy Townsend, Brian Little's captain in the Villa side in the mid-1990s. And during the game, Andy got a message from the former Villa striker Andy Gray to remind us that he was the last player at the club to score 25 goals in a top division season in 1976-77. I actually saw at first hand numbers 14 and 15 of those 25 in a 3-1 win at Leeds United, my first commentary on an Aston Villa match, never realising that Mr. Gray would later play a big part in my own life. Now Aston Villa are making history again, and in front of British and Hollywood royalty, the Prince of Wales and Tom Hanks. Unai Emery is not a coach set in his ways. He's built teams, successful teams, in different styles. This season's work, which included, of course, reaching the semi-final of the Europa Conference League, has been based on both high-line defending and low blocks, plus rapid counter-attacks, and a team made up of fine players, but is still one that is greater than the sum of its individual parts. That's down to the coach. Excellent work. Wherever they're drawn in the new Champions League format, the chances are that Emery, a king of Europe in football, will have been there before, and whoever the opponents are, they'd better watch out.
Jimmy Coombs,
Yes.
goalkeeper. I
Yes.
remember him at West Bromwich Albion.
Yeah,
for
before he
years.
went to Villa, yeah.
Yeah, and was he not a wicket keeper in cricket?
No, he's a fast bowler.
Was he a fast bowler?
Yeah. He wasn't as fast as Bob. Bob's sadly no longer with us and much missed by many people, especially and those who knew him as a friend. But Bob was rapid. Jim was steady, but he got plenty of wickets, and so he played for 4 different counties. But he's probably remembered in the cricket world as an administrator. And Lancashire, the whole, we talk about Old Trafford at Man Utd, you go across the road and you go to Old Trafford, Lancashire County Cricket Club. A lot of the design, and he battled through all sorts of red tape and bureaucracy to get his way and get the county a ground that sustains itself. They're one of the richer counties in a time where county cricket is not great.
The first I remember of Unai Emery was when he was manager of Valencia. Back in the 2007, 8, 9, 10 era. And that was when they'd just gone bust, and the stadium that they were building in the centre of the city was just left. And if you go to Valencia, you can see it, and it's 60% finished. I mean, you can see the stands, you can see everything being developed. And it's just been left there now for a decade and a half or something. Absolute madness. But they went bust, and every year they sold their best player. Raul Albiol went to Real Madrid, David Silva went to Manchester City, David Villa went to Barcelona, Juan Mata came to Chelsea. Every year they sold their best player, and yet every year he got them back in the Champions League. It was a phenomenal achievement, that.
Yeah, he knows the job. And I think his energy in the dugout, when coaches get older, you tend to see that's probably one of the things that goes, and that is a career decline. You can't coach without energy, however much you have to drag into old bones in certain cases to get it up there. For that, it's an act being a coach. For the players, you have to be what they want from you during every training session, every match. And he's got that act off to a fine art. And as I say, he's done it in different ways at different clubs. It's an extraordinary story.
Now, what Martin didn't tell us in that is that after all that heavy celebrating, the next day he had to go to his first ever FA Cup final.
Yeah.
We're going to come on to FA Cup finals in a minute, so we'll save that up. But from here, we're going to go to 3 of the best.
And he makes them pay.
Yes, right. Young player, old player, player. Martin, this week, young player.
Well, I've got to carry on from my letter from the Gantry because John Duran actually turned the game on its head. And he's come on the sub a lot of times. I think he's only ever started a couple of games. And he's raw and young, but clearly got potential. But what intrigued me afterwards was 2 things that John McGinn, who's been outstanding for Aston Villa for a number of years, but particularly this season, said about him, said that sometimes he brings chaos to our team, not the opposition, which he's supposed to do. And it's harder to play with him than against him sometimes. But obviously, he said that with a smile on his face. But the other thing that really made me laugh was he said he had no idea about Duran Duran, which of course was a band that started, I think, in the late 1970s. He couldn't understand what we were all been talking about. And of course, he will have been fated for I think every newspaper had Duran Duran mentioned in it. And they are still going, I believe, as a band. So in which case, they're probably grateful for the publicity as well. But just a raw footballer, and somebody's recruited the potential, but he turned that potential. 2 very different goals. A goal that was beautifully struck when they pressed high. Callum Chambers, who hardly plays these days, but has played for England, and he won the ball pressing. And from that point of view, then John Duran had the chance to make it 2-3. And then the freakish goal of the... we've got a new member of the podcast team here called...
Tamori. This is for people watching. Tamori, who doesn't like to be out of the limelight for long. My cats, Tammy and Tamori. And Tamori is marking me very closely.
Yes.
I'll be coming on to him in a moment.
But the freakish nature of John Duran's second goal, where he just stuck out a knee and it hit him sort of just above the knee and it went in, was, I suppose, part of the chaos. But he's definitely got something about him, and I'm sure... He will be starting games in the future, and maybe Champions League games, because he took them to the brink of that. So he's my young player of this week, this podcast.
Well, my young player is a centre-back. In fact, I'm concentrating on centre-backs for my players this week. And Jared Branthwaite, 21 years old, Everton, who's played next to James Tarkowski for the season. If I just give you, going into the last weekend of the Premier League season, the top clean sheets by club this season. 17 Arsenal, way the most. 13 second equal, Manchester City and Everton. Struggling Everton have the second most clean sheets in the Premier League this season. Jared Branthwaite is somebody that a lot of the big clubs are looking at.
And he's in the England squad.
Yeah.
Well, he was in the last England squad.
I've seen him.
What happens now.
I've seen him a few times this season. He's not bad. He's nowhere near ready for England, as far as I'm concerned. He's a big brute of a Premier League player. He needs to turn quicker. He needs to play quick. He needs quicker feet. He's got real potential, but I don't see him as somebody who could go into the Euros and do a job yet. I see him as somebody who needs to play for Everton for the next 2 or 3 years, and of course Sean
The injuries might give him a chance. I mean, John Stones hasn't
Well,
featured.
we'll come on to that, but Sean Dyche, of course, was a centre-back, and probably there's nowhere better for him to learn. He can play out from the back. He doesn't have to lump it, but I think he's a good Everton player for now.
And he scored a goal in the Merseyside derby win, didn't he?
He did, and he scored his first Premier League goal against Chelsea, and I will never forgive him, of course. but he's a youngster of great potential.
And from Carlisle, and that's the link between the Football League and the Premier League. No Carlisle, no Branthwaite. Think on.
Yeah, there you go. Who's your old player?
Well, it's Pep Guardiola. Not really in the category of an old player, but he is a former player and a very good one. And he's blessed with, certainly I would say, the greatest football brain of his generation. Maybe one of the greatest football brains of all time. So tactically, superbly astute. Blessed with fantastic backroom staff, giving him all the data that he needs to put his plans into operation with a certain amount of statistical confidence. And blessed with a magnificent bunch of players, where money almost no object. Of course, that's an issue about how much you can spend and all this these days. But the top of the tree, really, in terms of that. So totally gifted himself, and also backed up with everything that you could want for as a manager. And yet, he wears a lucky sweater in the searing heat of Fulham on a Saturday lunchtime, and again at Spurs in the searing battle of a match. So he can't win his games without the sweater. And I just think everybody who's been involved in football has had a superstitious moment or two. But when the greatest of the great have to wear an inappropriate piece of clothing, I mean, it's quite stylish. The last time I saw one like that was probably on Bob Paisley, who used to wear that around the training ground. And then certainly when I started watching football, the first football match I ever went to in the old First Division was at Charlton. They had a great goalkeeper called Sam Bartram, who had the roll neck sweater. So Pep's gone back in time and back into something other than logic, really. And the logic of his work is, everybody knows how great that is, but he still feels the need to wear the sweater. So on the grounds of the sweater, I have to bring him into this conversation. And this was the only way I thought I could do it, because he was an old player and a very good one.
I think it's worth remembering, and I think this ought to be asked to him in the press conference. I was looking up this week just exactly what the structure of the Champions League was when it first became the Champions League. And of course, in '92, when it first became the Champions League, it was still only the champions who went into it. And I was looking at the following season, the 93-94 season, and you had a first and second round, home and away, and then the teams, so that got rid of some of the less strong teams, and then from there you went into 2 group stages and played, as you do now in the group stage, three other teams, so that was another 6 games, and then it was first versus second, first versus the other second for the 2 semi-finals. And in 93-94, the final was Milan versus Barcelona. And Milan won 4-0 with Marcel Desailly getting the 4th goal. And there, as the holding midfielder for Barcelona, was Pep Guardiola. 4-0 defeat in a Champions League.
You know why he didn't wear his sweater to the game?
No, well, maybe that's what you should ask him. Right, okay. My old player, I've got 3 old players this week. And the reason I've got 3 is that I'm continuing with the central defensive theme and questioning what the hell is happening to English centre-backs. Jared Branthwaite, the up-and-coming. Thiago Silva is ending his English playing career at the age of 39 and going back to Brazil. Johnny Evans has played an awful lot this season for Manchester United at the age of 37.
When he didn't go there on that kind of contract initially.
No. And Angelo Ogbonna has come into the West Ham team for the last 3 months or so of the season because of injuries. He is 35. There are no other young centre-backs who are really coming through and impressing in the way that I'm going to come on next to what the hell are England going to do at centre-back in the Euros. But these 3 centre-backs, I mean, Thiago Silva came at the age of 35 and for the first couple of years was still world-class. Last season, he was still the Chelsea Player of the Year, and by a distance, by the way. Johnny Evans, I think he's been a bit lucky myself. He got relegated with West Brom. He got relegated with Leicester. For me, his best season still was when he won the Premier League with Manchester United as the kind of first reserve to Ferdinand and Vidic. But one of them was always injured that season, and he had a terrific season. Ogbonna, I always thought, was a pretty good West Ham centre-back, but that was 3 or 4 years ago. And no, respect to all of them, but someone should have come through. That's that. Your player this week.
Well, Neil, I'm going for James Milner, who's just signed, I've been offered, I'm sure he signed it, a new 1-year deal to extend an extraordinary playing career from being a 16-year-old at Leeds United through a number of big clubs. And when he left Liverpool, and this week it's come out, I don't know whether this is true or not, that actually Jurgen Klopp wanted to keep him, and because of his age and probably because of the salary as well, it wasn't rubber stamped from on high. But he went to Brighton, and he's annoyed with himself because he's finished the season injured. But he's played in different positions. He's played in the European games, played as a fullback, played probably more as a fullback than in midfield. But he still is the perfect professional. If anybody wants to model a career on how to have longevity, obviously the ability is a different matter altogether, but the longevity, he has made the very most of it. And I so admire those who, if you like, survival is the wrong word really, but can consistently do what is such a difficult job in such a pressure cooker situation. Every game where they're talking now about the mental stress of players, and that's considerable. That's changed a lot probably since James started as a 16-year-old, but every kick of the ball is now analysed, and you're under the microscope all the time. He's learned to live with that. He's looked after his body. He's probably not had more than one half a shandy in the whole 20 odd years. the legendary drinks black currant juice that I'm not allowed to mention unless they sponsor the podcast. He's just, he is a true icon. I mean, people say legend, whatever word you want. I think it's a fantastic career, and I'm absolutely thrilled that it's not finished yet. James Milner, legend.
And it's so sad that he was injured and couldn't play for Brighton against Chelsea at the end of the season, because it would have been the 38th time he'd faced Chelsea in his league career, and that would have equalled the record of the most number of times any player had faced one opposition, 38, held by Ryan Giggs against Liverpool.
Well, he's got another season,
Yes.
a couple of games to come, so good luck with that. But and he also can catch Gareth Barry as well,
for the
most number of Premier League appearances. I'm sure that's in his mind as well.
Yeah, limping on. Wonderful. Right, I have a load of players for my player that I want to talk about this week, so I'm going to race through them. And this is the issue that I've been keeping as a theme in this week: centre-backs. What are England going to do in the Euros with centre-backs? Now, we've talked about Jared Branthwaite, and he was in the last England squad. Obviously, the two favoured centre-backs for years now have been John Stones, who's hardly played this season because it's his year to be Pep's
put in isolation.
Yeah, season of...
It's not a season. It comes in chunks, doesn't it? And unfortunately for John, it's happening at the moment.
10 league games, haven't we?
Yeah, but he will be fit, I'm sure. Maybe not match fit, but he will be fit to go.
Harry Maguire is not the flavour of the season either at Manchester United, despite playing most of the season because of injuries. But we know what his situation is there, and he's finished the season injured. The kind of apparent heir to the throne seemed to be Mark Gahey, who of course I knew as a youth player at Chelsea, but he was injured at Crystal Palace when Ollie Glasner came in, and Glasner's now gone to three at the back with Nathaniel Klein, Jerome Anderson and Chris Richards.
It's not Jerome Anderson.
Joachim.
He might be his agent.
Yeah,
Yes.
Joachim Anderson. And Chris Richards. So
Yeah.
Gahey's watching from the bench.
But he's getting on and he's fit. So
Lewis Dunk has been in the England squads, deservedly so, recently.
he had a tough game in his last game.
He's had a tough season. He's not played well this season, and now he's injured. For me, Brighton can't cope without Lewis Dunk, but Lewis Dunk can't cope without Adam Webster, and he's been injured all season as well. And then I look at other possibilities. Joe Gomez has never really, since his injury, nailed a centre-back position, has played more at full-back at Liverpool.
And Jarrell Quansah's got that job, who is English,
Yeah.
but younger than Branthwaite, so his time will come. I'm sure he will play. But you haven't mentioned, I say Quansah, you can also say Konsa.
Yeah.
Ezri Konsa has been in England squads, and he certainly has finished the season fit as far as we know.
Yeah, and has he got one cap now, Consi? He came on, didn't
he did. He played
So
in the March Internationals.
he's a possibility. Fikayo Tomori has never seemed to be one of Gareth Southgate's favourites. He's been tried a couple of times, but I mean, Champions League semi-finalist, Serie A champion, but not so far. I would shout from the rooftops the arguments for Trevor Chalobah. He's never been in an England squad, but has finished in Chelsea's first team, playing all the games recently when Chelsea have risen up the table.
But some at right back.
Well, that makes him even more of a mobile player, but mostly at centre back. He is a centre back, but he can play right back as well because he's got quick feet, quick brain, mobility. He's your answer, Gareth. But more, will Eric Dyer be called back into the
There's
setup?
talk of it.
Bayern Munich. He has done well at Bayern Munich. People talk about Max Kilman at Wolves, who's, I don't think, been in a full England squad ever.
He has at futsal.
Yeah.
Yeah, his amazing career, really, from Maidenhead United to England futsal. I think that was pretty simultaneous, and then to get into a team, and now I think he's captain. He's been, certainly with the injuries, he's been captain of Wolves, and he's grown as a person. I often wanted to talk to him, do an interview with him, because I think it's a great story, and there's so much of the charm of being in the privileged positions that we find ourselves is to be able to discuss those stories. But he was so shy, he didn't want to do it. Now he's actually come out of himself, and Wolves have been clever at that because he's had leadership and he's done interviews. So yeah, he's not out of the question.
And
he's qualified for a few other countries as well, by the way.
To bring the whole thing full circle, from Jared Branthwaite, James Tarkowski, who has played for England.
Well, when we were talking earlier about Sean Dyche and his influence, I wanted to mention James Tarkowski, who's had a couple of caps and I think gave away a penalty in one of his England games against Italy a few years back. But basically is a real steady Premier League centre-back. And it is extraordinary at Everton what they've done to have these clean sheets and to win their home games, all with clean sheets towards the end of the season. And he's played a big part in that. And he's a warrior, James Tarkowski. The physicality of the game is less than it was. He would have enjoyed playing 30 or 40 years ago, I'm sure. But he's a candidate. And if you're painting the worst case scenario, he's definitely a candidate.
Well, the scenario I am painting is, I think Gareth Southgate's got a problem. And it's going to be one where he's going to need a little bit of luck on his side that he can find the right partnership that's going to work, because I don't think it'll be easy given all the problems that these players have had this season.
Well, arguably with the best midfield in the Euros, and certainly with Harry Kane, one of the best, if not the best, deference to Kylian Mbappe here. But England have a lot in an attacking sense, and it would be a shame if the traditional England sides basically defended quite well and couldn't score enough goals in big competitions. Now it's going to be the other way around. Kyle Walker, of course, can play as a centre-back in a three. Yeah. And he's had an amazing season. He's absolutely amazing. Whatever he's on, I want some of it.
I thought you gave it to him. Right, that is three of the best, and we're going to jump straight from that to Voice of Passion,
with a bit of reason beside it.
Voice of Passion.
My voice of passion this week is about sports scientists. They've come into there's just too many people in the game, nutritionists, sports scientists, this, that and the other. But sports scientists, they tell the manager, he's played so many games recently, he needs only put him on the bench and only play him 20 minutes this week, or he's coming back from injury, he can only manage 10 minutes, and so on and so on. And they rule strongly. And in the age where a coach gets ditched for 3 defeats in a row, if a sports scientist says to him, you cannot play him and he's your best player, you think, do I ignore him or do I and play him? What happens if he breaks down? And the hierarchy say to me, you made a mistake there, you're out. Or on the other hand, do you do as you say and then you don't have your best player and then you lose the game? Now, I just want to focus for a moment on my team, Chelsea, who I support. It's been a very difficult season of a lot of youngsters having to develop. And towards the end of the season, they have developed and they have improved. And I look at it, and I look at Nicholas Jackson, who's had a lot of criticism, but has finished up getting quite a lot of praise at the end of the season. And for the second half of the season, Brozier's been on loan at Fulham, and Nkunku's been injured and hasn't started a game, so he's played 90 minutes, week in, week out. And the thing is, what Maurizio Pochettino discovered was nobody else could really take his place. He's tried different ways, but nobody else could take his place. So he's played 90 minutes, game in, game out. Guess what's happened? He's improved. Then in midfield, he had an injury to all the backup midfielders. Lavia, who was bought from Southampton, Ugo Chukwu, who was bought from Ligue 1, and he played Enzo Fernandez and Caicedo. Week in, week out. Caicedo, £110 million, the record signing from Brighton. 90 minutes, every game. And all of a sudden, in the last 2 months, he has been probably, even with Cole Palmer, the outstanding player at Chelsea. He's been absolutely magnificent. Cole Palmer. Now, it's a little bit different with him, but he has played 90 minutes every game. But there have been injuries to wide players, and whether he's played wide or number 10, it's been 90 minutes every game, come what may. This is not what sports scientists want, but there have been so many injuries, and they are 3 players who, through playing every week, every game, all game, have improved beyond belief.
Yeah, but you're not in Europe. So you can play every week.
Well, why don't we ditch the sports scientists if we're not in Europe?
Well,
I'm not saying at Chelsea, I'm saying generally.
The truth is that the sports scientist's job is to advise the coaches. It's not to tell them. I know there are stories about they try to tell, but they are trying to prevent injuries. And they have all sorts of medical data now available where you can say, well, if he plays more than an hour in the next game, there's a real risk of him being injured. But you're the manager. If you want to play him and that hour will win you the game, then do it. They're not as dictatorial as you say, but they're obviously risk aversive as well, because their job depends on giving the right kind of advice. And the one thing that you can't, with all the data we're talking about, you cannot be sure of. Everybody's got a different body, a different metabolism, and you're not sure how they're going to respond to the pressure, the loading. That's the word I hear a lot about. Oh, his load's too great. We can't play him this week because he's been overloaded by playing all these minutes. But you're also talking about people who are 22 years old. So if you can play all the time, really, but not perhaps at the intensity of Premier League. But there is, what I would say is, obviously I go back a long way, and some people listening might think, oh yeah, he's on it again. But Brian Clough used to say, well done, we played on Saturday, and they were in Europe, and they were playing 42 league games. And they said, well, we'll see you Wednesday or Thursday. Rest is a commodity that I don't think modern day, it's almost as if I coached at a non-league club at the end of the season, and the chairman of the club, if we finished a training session early, he wanted to know why. He's standing there saying, they should be in, they're getting paid, they should be here longer. There'll be pressure to go to the training ground. If you give them 3 days off, and you do that. And there was a lovely story about Oliver Glasner, who you've just mentioned. He did a deal with the players over a 3-game period. If they got a certain amount of points, it was a staggered thing. If you got the most points, you get more days off. And so he's recognising the value of rest. But you've got to earn it. And maybe that's one way of doing it. But rest is so important. And sports scientists probably think, well, they've got to train today, and their training is intense. You've got to do the proper long warm-ups to make sure everything's stretched and everything. I think it's a bit too much. Even the warm-up before matches, I think it's amazing. I mean, you talk to older players and they used to jog out, do a few stretches, a couple of across the pitches, sprints and everything.
Having had their last fag.
Well, and probably a swig of something as well on the way out. But those things haven't been. And when we're talking about, and I know there's a point even before we come to the end of this podcast about too much football. Maybe there's too much training in between.
Yeah,
and the nature of the training, and the thing that actually I am trying to be the voice of reason on this, but the thing I absolutely detest is the players having to go all around the world in July to prepare for a season where they're not going all around the world, but to make the clubs money and create the footprint, wider footprint for the clubs to get a commercial success. That is what is damaging the players. A proper pre-season. I remember Arsene Wenger was the last one to give in to this. His pre-seasons were all around London, really. And then suddenly somebody said to him, look, we're going to get this for going there, and we've got to go. Well, there's a lot of money about at the moment. I'm not sure you have to go there to do it. And that's the one thing that I'm a voice of passion about, is stop travelling around the world and messing about with people's time zones. Yeah, and the carbon footprint. If you need a reason to argue now, Arsene Wenger probably would have had that reason even then. But that's where you prepare properly. And I know your team, for example, are going to have a couple of weeks, I believe, at home before they go off on their travels, which is a step in the right direction. That's me ranting. That's most unusual.
I remember
I have to apologise for
I remember a manager, I can't remember who it was or who the player was. My natural thing is to say the player was Frank Lampard, but I'm not sure that it was. I'm not even sure it was Chelsea. But I remember a manager saying that there was a player who had played 120 games in a row and was kind of coming up through all the records of consecutive appearances. And the sports scientist told him to leave him out because he was overloading. And he said, what will that do to his psychology if I break the consecutive appearances? No, his body won't take it. Well, I'll decide on that. He's playing 90 minutes. And of course he came through and he played on and he played on and he played on. And I think a manager's know-how, a coach's know-how is often undermined by a lot of these people rather than supported.
You've got a player like James Milner, who I would say to the sports scientist, I'm all right, trust me. But the younger players now are all brought up with the dreadful fear of being injured. And it's certainly understandable to some extent with some of the serious, probably career-threatening injuries. But listen, I know the coaches feel a bit like you about the managers, about the sports scientists, but they are important. And the wealth of the Premier League has expanded to be able to employ these people. And I'm sure the welfare of the players is better for it generally, but you do get these sticking points.
Okay, we're coming to the end and we're going into stoppage time, so we're going to be very quick in stoppage time. We're not going for the long term stoppage time.
Even though we've had a VAR stoppage earlier.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry about that. I am sorry. But it almost got the right decision in the end. Almost. It's just that it was wrong. We discussed on here not long ago the stupidity of FIFA and its Club World Cup with 32 teams and trying to emulate the World Cup and taking June and July away from the elite players and making them play in this tournament. FIFPro, the union, the worldwide union of the players, has now come out and they're challenging FIFA over it and they want FIFA to drop it.
Well, I go back to what I've just said. I think you could squeeze it in if you don't send them off around the world again straight afterwards. That to me is where player welfare is important. I think players should have a month off. I know it's 3 weeks at the moment. But
3 weeks minimum.
Yeah, where they can mentally refresh themselves as well as physically. They don't go on the lash anymore as they used to. They come back almost as fit as when they left. Yes, but they know what they've got to do to be ready. So they don't turn up to do the first 2 weeks of pre-season to get rid of all the excesses.
And they give them programmes for while they're away.
Yeah, they are. They are constantly. And this is where I always speak up for footballers. They are living the profession every minute of every day, you know. So I think that I can understand FIFA are trying to make money, and we'd be stupid if we think that can be abolished. And you might say, well, you've just argued about not going on tours, that makes money. But this is for the world organisation, which will spread that money around the football world of 189 of 193 countries, I think they cover, or something like that. So, but it's a challenge to it. And as you say, we'll see what response is. But Wolves have challenged VAR, and that's not going to make it. It's a sabre rattling, and this will be the same, I think. I hope, in a way, we have a look at the tournament, but it's something has to give in the calendar, and it's the pre-season matches that don't mean anything. I've commentated on pre-season tournaments, and you can draw something out for the season you're looking for, maybe the future, but really you want a result that matters. These results will matter, and the clubs will have it on their roll of honour. Are Chelsea in it?
The Club World Cup, yes.
European
champions in 2021. European champions. And we're going to end with the cup final, the FA Cup final.
Like this season's going to.
Which for you is very important.
Well, it happened before. I can remember when Stoke played Manchester City. Man City beat Stoke at Wembley not that long ago, 12, 13 years ago.
2011.
2011, yeah. And I was commentating on the day of Manchester United winning the league at Blackburn Rovers. And so it has happened before. What we're referring to is this new deal, which involves abolishing the replays. And that got a lot of traction, a lot of headlines. What people, I don't think, made more of and should have made more of was the fact that the cup final will not be the last game of the season. The Premier League are saying that
our Premier League is so dominant.
But this Premier League, and we're talking now as we're approaching the last Premier League weekend of the season, there's a lot riding on it, including for Chelsea. And I can understand the argument that could, because it's spread wider than the two clubs in a cup final, that maybe should have the position of prominent, which is the last weekend of the season. That's the debate. So the FA Cup final will be on its own on a Saturday. In the preceding weekend, there will be no Premier League fixtures, unlike in 2011. So that it'll get its place. What I think...
there will be fixtures on Sunday.
Yes. And not the Friday, but the Sunday and the Monday. But what I think everybody's not quite aware of, and I am as broadcaster of the World Feed, which I have been for a few years now, the interest in the FA Cup final around the world is massive. It's like it used to be in this country. It hasn't gone away. Of course, they all love the Premier League as well, but the FA Cup final is still special. I'm being asked to do special things for different broadcasters. They love it, and they love the way we traditionally commentate on it, which is to give it the reverence that when gosh, I didn't commentate on a final till 1990, but as you know, I went to the final in 1972 with my ticket from Villa Park, where I managed to get there in time, just about.
Can I just say, my first FA Cup final in the stands was 1963, so I was well before you. Manchester United beat Leicester 3-1.
Yes, but what you didn't do is go to Wembley in 1958 when my team, Woking, won the Amateur Cup in front of 71,000 people, and they won 3-0, and I went with a schoolmate, and he couldn't watch because although it was 3-0 in the end, it was 1-0. Woking was supposed to win against Ilford. It was two teams from the same league. And Woking scored at about 37th minute. I was going that way. The first 20 minutes of the second half, and I was with the goalkeeper only last week, who's 89 now, John
fantastic.
Burley. And he made save after save after save. And then Woking scored 2 near the end, and it looked like it was supposed to look. But my mate couldn't watch. And I've always said that was my first commentary because I could watch. And he was about 8 or 9 months younger than me, so I just crossed that line into manhood, at the age of 11. And I commentated on, yes, Burley's made another save, and I had the privilege.
Was that your first time at Wembley?
That was my first time at Wembley, yeah.
First
April the 12th, 1958. The glorious 12th.
My first time at Wembley was England 9, Scotland 3 in 1961. Oh, wow. Jimmy Greaves hat-trick, Chelsea.
Yeah.
Right.
Have we done?
No, I just want to bring up one other thing on the FA Cup final, which is, until a few years ago, if the winners were already in Europe, then the runners-up went into Europe. Millwall did it in 2004. Chelsea did it in 1994 when Manchester United won the double. That's no longer the case. I just want to clear up, therefore, this year is quite extraordinary. It's changed this year. So you get 4 teams into the Champions League. You get 5th place into the Europa.
Could have been 5.
But Germany and Italy got the new setup in UEFA in Champions League. Got the extra places. You get 5th place and the FA Cup winners into the Europa League, and no longer does the Premier League get the bottom place. That goes to the Carabao Cup. But because the Carabao Cup this year was won by Liverpool, who are in the Champions League, it does go back to the Premier League. So it's now a question of, if Manchester City win the FA Cup, then the last place goes back to the Premier League as well.
Not to Manchester United, who would therefore lose the FA Cup final as it was.
Yeah. So it goes. It would go 5th and 6th into the Europa, and 7th into the Europa League, and 7th into the Conference. But if Manchester United win the FA Cup, then they would go into the Europa with the 5th place team, and the 6th place club in the Premier League would go into the conference. I go back to when UEFA persuaded everyone that 2, not 4, clubs should go into the Champions League, 1st and 2nd. And there was a pre-match press conference at Stamford Bridge with the Chelsea manager, Ruud Gullit, and everyone was saying, the FA Cup's being downgraded, isn't it? Because the Premier League is so strong now. And he looked with a big smile on his face and he said, well, if you love the FA Cup so much, give the FA Cup winners a Champions League place. One for the FA Cup winners and one for the Premier League. And a load of us thought, what a great idea. What do you think?
Well, all the clubs that have won the FA Cup recently, by 1 or 2, have been the clubs that are in the Champions League anyway under the new system. So,
but it would still give more kudos, wouldn't it?
No, it would. No, because these clubs, and we've got 2 giants of the game competing in the cup final for a 2nd year running. That's the first time ever, actually, that 2 English clubs have come back to back for the same final. So Blackburn did it in the 19th century, but they played Queen's Park from Glasgow. The Scottish clubs were in it for a time. So it's repetitive. No, you can't do that. You win 6 games and you go into the Champions League. That's not right. As much as I love the FA Cup, and I really do love it, but it's been put forward before, and it's no, it doesn't resonate with me. And the FA Cup has to fight for its place in the pecking order. It's had some great games, and maybe we were talking earlier that if Coventry were in the final, we might be having a different view of it. But and they were so close.
Rob's
but I have
to.
We're finishing off now, and I have to say the only reason that we have now had added time. By the way, the only reason is that Chelsea find themselves 6th in the table, and they're terrified that Manchester United will win the FA Cup, and that they will be downgraded, maybe out of Europe altogether, if they don't beat Bournemouth in the last game, or maybe downgraded from the Europa League to the Europa Conference League, which is not to be sneered at, as West Ham will tell you.
I just want to say that if you can't justify going into the Champions League by winning 6 games, how do you justify the Scottish League and Rangers and Celtic? But that will probably get us lots of enemies, won't it?
Yeah, we're not going to go there, and we might. It's a good topic, the domination of... But Bayern Munich have finally got toppled by Leverkusen, one of the great stories of the season. And when I was going up to Scotland working for ITV, I was going to a title-winning club called Aberdeen.
Managed by?
Alec Ferguson, plain Alec then, and who was a great help to a young commentator in those days. Mind you, I wasn't so young, to be honest.
And thank you to everyone who's helped us put this podcast together, but no thanks to VAR. From Martin and me.
He has the last word, so I'll say bye. You've got another word to say then.
Ta-ra. If you want to contact us, you can do so by email on the joys, plural, the joys of football podcast @gmail.com. And of course, you can follow us on all the social media outlets, and you can even go to our Patreon and see what's on offer. And hey, if you want to sponsor us, well, you can find me. I'll give you my phone number. The joy of football.